Yes, today, campaigners are protesting in Cardiff against a company who were shipping prisoners from Prescoed prison to a call centre to work for 40 pence an hour. They say it's wrong and it takes jobs away from normal staff. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Justice is planning to set up call centres inside prisons. How would you feel about ringing in to find you're talking to a convicted criminal? Would you feel comfortable with that? Is it exploiting prisoners? The number to call, 03700 100 110. The text, of course, is 81012. Or you can send me a tweet on @MyDavisNews. Well, I'm joined now by Stacey, who's Head of Projects and Services for Unlock, which is the National Association of Ex-Offenders, and also Jeff Dobson from the Prison Reform Trust. Good afternoon to you both.
Good afternoon.
Christopher,
Good afternoon.
Can I ask you first of all, what do you make of the scheme to put call centres in prisons?
Well, it's certainly a new one on us. I know that the government are particularly keen to get industry and employers working with prisons, and I think it's good that people in prison are given an opportunity to develop skills, experiences and qualifications and what have you. But I think the balance may well go the wrong way and see this as a way of exploiting cheap labour, for example. And I think what we need to be focusing on is trying to give industry a reason to go into prisons, i.e. a motivated workforce and dedicated employees, but also making sure that the people that they're using for that, i.e. prisoners, are getting fair pay for the work that they're doing, given that these are private companies that are getting paid commercial rates for delivering the work that they're doing.
Jeff Dobson from the Prison Reform Trust, do you agree with Christopher?
I agree with what Chris says, but it's worth saying that there's strong research evidence to show that work is a way out of crime, and we're all interested in reducing reoffending. There are some very good schemes for work in prisons provided by organisations such as National Grid and Timpsons, and those are linked to work opportunities on release, so that if a prisoner proves themselves reliable and good at the job, then they carry on in employment after release, and that's the sort of scheme that we'd like to see developed.
Well, what kind of, there are obviously work schemes in prisons at the moment, and there always have been, but what kind of work do they do at the moment? Because call centre seems an odd marriage with a prison.
Well, as I say, there's National Grid in terms of laying pipes, and Timpsons in terms of the shops that they provide. They employ people in prisons, but there are a whole range of things. Indeed, the Clink restaurant at Highdown Prison is going to have a new restaurant, a new branch in a Welsh prison in Cardiff in the autumn. So that will be training prisoners to cook food under supervision, to learn how to be waiters and learn how to run a restaurant, and those people will then have the skills and be able to get references on release to go and get jobs in the catering trade, and it's that sort of thing that's proven to be useful.
Well, I've had some tweets on this already, all along very similar lines. Phil Ottawa says, this is what they do in the US. Prisoners replaced the Far East as the #1 source of cheap labour. Nia says, what a ridiculous plan. They're not in prison to enjoy chatting. Darren Power says, I'd rather be answered by someone doing a real job for a real wage. No to cheap slave labour, yes to real jobs. And Andrew Morgan says, are they going to tell callers before they divulge information that they're manned by prisoners at the beginning of each call? I mean, Christopher Stacey, I imagine there will be a lot of discomfort out there with people thinking that they might be giving personal details out or having prisoners with access to their personal details.
I think it's worth separating out two different things here. I think, as Jess says, giving people in prison an opportunity to develop skills and experiences and enhance their employment prospects on release is a really important point. But there is the risk that industries and employers see this as an opportunity of taking advantage of cheap labour, and the consequence of that is that potentially takes away jobs for people in the community.
But what about giving I'm ringing a call centre,
yeah.
I don't know who's answering my phone, and it turns out that it's somebody sitting in a prison. I might be very uncomfortable with that, and I never know.
But why would you know? These employers will be working closely with the prisons that they're working with to make sure that there are processes in place so that people are risk assessed before that they go into these environments, so that there are strict monitoring processes around. These employers don't want to ruin their own reputations by doing this work. They need to have a reason to go into prisons, and they will all have different reasons, and so it's impossible to make general statements statements around the motivations of these employers. I think.
But for instance, could it be internet banking? Could it be an electricity company where you're going to deal with somebody and talk about your address and your details and your date of birth and all of those things?
Well, you could hypothesise that. I don't know is the honest answer to that. I don't know what the call centre that is being mentioned is looking to work on. I'm sure that they will have strict agreements with the companies that they work on behalf of, because that's often the nature of call centre work. It's contracted out. I'm sure they'll have strict arrangements to make sure that they don't put their customers at risk, and I'm sure that will be delivered on. There's often a lot of stereotypes and sort of gut feelings about working with prisons and working with people who have convictions that are misplaced and not really bear any real resemblance to what happens in practice. Those employers like Timpson's and many others that have worked with prisons and people who have convictions have found that they are some of the best employees that they ever have, because people with convictions find it incredibly difficult with a criminal record to get employment, and when they get it, they don't want to abuse it. And let's not forget that the people here that we're talking about are people that are in prison, and if they abuse their positions, whatever it may be, they will suffer as a result of that. So the people that are wanting to work are the ones that we want to encourage to work and give them opportunities to work. The important point, though, is that the balance doesn't get go over to the wrong side and see that as exploitation. Clearly, training opportunities that are perhaps not paid and skills and qualifications is one thing, but we must always be working towards long-term sustainable employment for people with convictions and people that are in prison moving towards release.
Christopher, the call we had just before the travel news from Hannah in Torfaen was quite interesting when I asked her the question of pay, that they're getting such a small amount of money, and she said, but they're in prison, what are they going to spend it on? What do they spend it on in prison? What is there to spend money on?
Well, people in prison across the country, whether they work or not, whether they're maybe in education or what have you, get very small amounts of money. So talking £2, £3, £4 a week, and things like tobacco and phone calls to families are the common things. The people at Prescoed that are working out are people that are in the open estate, so they're not high risk people. They've gone through a strict process, so they're working out. They're paying for their travel to go to work, for example.
Hang on. So the money they get when they work, they pay to get to work?
Yes, of course.
So they're effectively earning nothing?
Well, very few prisoners, people who are working out in that way, make much money, especially when they're being paid such low wages. We have a volunteer scheme here at our office, and we have people from the local prison doing volunteer work to help on our advice services. And recently, the government have introduced a levy on people who are working out in prison. So they pay 40% of their wages to a victims fund. Now, we agree that there needs to be a way of people sort of paying back for their crimes, but there also needs to be a process by which people can save so that when they are released, for example, they are able to do things like get a house, for example. So it's really important to get that balance right. And at the moment, the wages that employers pay in this kind of situation, if they're only paying £2 or £3 a week, or a day, and if they pay a victim's levy on top of that, it makes working out very, very unaffordable for people. And that's a strange situation to be in.
Okay.
People who have always worked out in prison for a long time, these kind of schemes where people go out of open prisons and go into the community and do paid work, has happened for a long time. The difference with this is that it runs the risk of subsidising commercial contracts, and that's the risk as far as we're concerned. We're all in favour of proper opportunities and giving people a chance to leave crime behind.
Okay. Still with me is Christopher Stacey from the National Association of Ex-Offenders. Christopher, can I ask you first of all, Gaynor was talking about working with prisoners there in prisons, and you represent National Association of Ex-Offenders. What kind of rehabilitation do most prisons have? Because Di was saying earlier that it's pretty woeful in a lot of prisons.
It's incredibly difficult to generalise. I mean, there's some very good prison programmes that give people opportunities, give people help to address some of the issues that led to their offending.
Does it depend on the prison?
Of course,
completely.
It depends on the length of sentence that some people receive. Some people receive some very short sentences, and so prisons can't really do very much with them. Some people receive very long sentences, and still the prison system doesn't do very much to tackle some of the problems that those people had. I think that the important thing to remember here is that people are in prison to serve a punishment. That's why they go into prison. Everything else that should be done in prison should be focused around stopping people doing something again. So good prisons are able to do that, and good prisons have opportunities for the people in there. I find it strange that some of the arguments seem to be around people in prison getting sort of preferential treatment. I wouldn't class £3 a day for working in the call centre preferential treatment. I'd call that rather strange commercial operations, to be honest.
Are there any schemes or employment schemes where specifically targeted at ex-offenders? The reason I ask, Christopher, is just I've had an interesting text from Pat in Cwmbran. She says, my son got made redundant. He was called to the job centre for a job. When he arrived, he was told he had to be an ex-offender. Honest people are at a disadvantage. It's disgusting. What kind of scheme is she talking about there?
I'm not entirely sure. There are a lot of programmes in the community focused at trying to help people with convictions, people who are on probation particularly. I wouldn't say that it was an advantage to be in that situation. I have a criminal record, and I know for certain that it isn't an advantage having a criminal record trying to get into employment. The schemes that are out there tend to be, if I'm entirely honest, more focused around giving people maybe skills and qualifications. What they don't necessarily do is lead to employment opportunities for people. One of the pieces of work that I'm working on at the moment is an employer engagement project that's trying to work with employers to kind of see past people's convictions, and once you've properly risk assessed, actually, how can you just treat these people like normal people? Because at the end of the day, these people are normal people. They've committed their offences, they've served their punishment, they now need to just be able to get on with their lives. So I think the important thing for employers is to know how to properly risk assess convictions, but then how to recruit them, because like Di Davis said, there are over 9 million people in this country with a criminal record.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to see this group as a separate group of people that are sort of three-headed monsters. They are real people.
Because there's too many of them.
Sorry?
Because there's too many of them.
Well, you could look at it that way, or you could look at it as not so much normalised, that it's normal to have a criminal record, but it certainly isn't as strange as people
Not
might
as
think.
unusual as we think.
And it's not as difficult to pick up a criminal record as people might think either. And I think some people should just be careful about what they wish for, because people stereotype this group of people as being this terrible group of people. And whilst it's right that there are some very serious people that rightly should be excluded from certain types of jobs and what have you, that's not everybody.
Christopher, Stacey, kind of final point from you as somebody who represents the National Association of Ex-Offenders. The Ministry of Justice is going to have a hard time, no matter how many assurances they put in place, kind of selling this idea of call centres in prisons to the public, aren't they?
They are. I think what they've got to do is make sure that each employer comes into this for the right reasons, and that each prison is doing their share of the sort of bargain as well. So they're putting forward the right people for these jobs, the employers are offering the right jobs, and the employers are fitting this work into their employment business as it should be properly. So if they are offering training, then that's fine. If they are delivering commercial contracts that make the company money, then they should be passing that on to the people that they employ, whether that be people who are working out from prison or the people in the community, to make sure that it doesn't take away jobs and creates resentment. There's
going to be a tough sell to the public, I think, Christopher. But thank you very much. That's Christopher Stacey